Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So I'm actually wearing part of my costume for when I was supposed to be in the Renaissance Fair. I don't know if you remember that was actually this year. That does not seem possible, but yeah. That was one of the things that was lost to the pandemic, and literally no one is here to stop me, so now I'm wearing it tucked into jeans. So, I'm drinking LaCroix, which Mr. Blake calls dystopian soda, and he's right. It's very bland. Although this is Raz Cranberry, which I do think is the best one, but I'm having some. So, carbonation it is. So, this weekend was my anniversary, my wedding anniversary with Mr. Blake, and that's not really important, except that it's significant in my life. I did want to say, though, I feel like one of the number one critiques that I've seen on my work, any of my work, original work or fan fiction, is there's always someone who's like, all this insta love, they always call it insta love. This insta love is so unrealistic. And like, I get where they're coming from, but my experience is most definitely insta love. Like, I took one look at him and was like, oh shit, there's the rest of my life. Like, I'm not even joking. I didn't think it maybe in exactly those terms, but I was like, there's something very important about him. If you're new here, this is the story, is that Mr. Blake was assigned to do a fitness assessment for me in the health club that like my law school had a gym membership with. And so I had to do a fitness assessment. My dog is displeased that I'm talking. He's going to interrupt for however long that takes. Okay, not long. So, Mr. Blake was assigned to me to do a fitness assessment. He assessed me as not particularly fit, but asked me if I would want to come back. This was a Thursday. He asked me if I'd want to come back on Monday for another session. And we had such a good hour, even though it was like horrible. It was the hardest I'd ever worked out in my life because he was like testing me and I was not in good shape. Sometimes you know that something has changed in your life in an hour. And so I told myself that if he didn't ask me out that Monday, that I would ask him out, but he ended up asking me out on Friday. We went on our first date on Saturday, and I feel like it just never ended. It was just this very like immediate thing for both of us that it was like, oh, like we're doing this. He called me his girlfriend within like a week. He told me he was going to marry me within 3 weeks. I thought this was all crazy and rushed, but at the same time, I didn't want to slow down either. And yeah, so I admit that maybe one of my flaws is that I do write love that happens very quickly. But in my defense, it's because sometimes there's not a good way to explain that like this is just happening now. I can grasp how it feels unrealistic. There are plenty of love stories in the world. I do like to think that I write many of them, but every now and then I trip into a love story that is very like mine. So kind of like Sasha and Lev in One for My Enemy, or The Commoner's Guide to Petting a Royal. It's something that happens very quickly. The chemistry is just there within like a conversation. And yeah, I get that people think it's not real. I understand that, and I don't mind, but that's my love story, so it'll pop up sometimes. Sorry if you guys aren't into it. So anyway, I've had a history of being very, very bad at recognizing when someone is flirting with me. And recently a guy has been texting me constantly with a heavy dose of emojis. Okay, have I mentioned that I don't speak emoji? Someone once asked me like years ago, an anon, I think on Tumblr, was like, why do you never use emojis? And I was like, because I have words and I don't understand what emojis are trying to tell me. Like most of the time, if you use emojis like liberally, I have no idea what you're saying to me. I don't think it has anything to do with my age group because my friends send me emojis all the time. My therapist sends me emojis. And when I was explaining to her that I just don't understand what people are saying, it's like I don't speak whatever modern hieroglyph this is. I use the eye roll a lot. And I use the like that face all the time. Anyway, so let me just open with you. Thankfully, you did not ask me how to translate the emojis because I can't help you. I don't know. What is the nose blowing emoji? What does it mean? People use that and I'm like, I don't know what this is. So I'm not sure if he's interested in me romantically or if he's simply super friendly. For more context, he said his goal is to make me laugh. If we're ever somewhere and we see spiders, I'll take care of them. And he constantly checks in to see if I'm having a good day. he might be interested in you romantically. This doesn't sound platonic. It's hard to say. My brother is very weird. Like, he and I don't text very often, almost never. But whenever he does text me, I get this weird, like, feeling like maybe someone has taken over his body. Like, I always want to ask him, like, you know, like, blink once if you've been captured. But I think that's just, like, the way he texts is very, very strange. So I actually think he might not be doing well with apps, you know? Just because I don't understand. Sometimes when he texts me, I'm like, did mom tell you to say that? This is not important. Another issue is that I'm very uninterested. Okay, so let's assume that he's romantically interested in you. I think probably that's what this means. Probably. If he's saying that he'll kill the spiders, he's basically offering to be a provider for you. So it seems like something that is probably romantic. You're uninterested. How should I go about telling him that? Thank you. Okay, so a few months ago, someone asked me, actually it was probably longer than that because I have no concept of time, but at some point someone asked me what to do because they had just gotten ghosted. And I said that there are going to be opportunities for ghosting that are actually maybe the better thing to do. And I think this might be the opportunity for a little bit of light ghosting. And I know this sounds terrible, but essentially, if you reply very quickly every time he talks to you, you are reinforcing the idea that you like what he's doing. Versus if you don't respond right away, or you, let's put it this way. I have a friend who, you know, sometimes I can send her random things I'm thinking about, because sometimes she's available for a conversation, or she'll, you know, we have the same interests, the same sort of like quirky, like, oh, this thing is funny. So sometimes I send her stuff, but then other times she may not answer me at all. She may not answer me for weeks. So basically I kind of, you know, there'll be like a string of times when I'm like, oh, I can definitely send this to her because she's been very responsive lately. And then sometimes where it's like, okay, there's no point sending this to her because I'm probably not going to get a response for a long time. It doesn't mean we're not friends. It just means that I'm not, like, it's not always worth sharing something and then kind of like dealing with the silence that follows. So basically, she has reinforced for me that I shouldn't send her all of my thoughts. If you want him to feel like a priority in your life, you prioritize him. If you don't want him to feel like a priority in your life, you don't prioritize him. These are sort of natural things, I think. I think especially at this point when we all know that everybody has their phone on them all the time. If someone doesn't respond to you very quickly, it's because they're not really that interested in what you're saying. And as like hard as that is when it's you and you're in that position, it can be easier than someone just staying straight up like, can you talk to me less? Sometimes you just kind of have to rely on the social cues of, I'm not getting a response, so I should probably stop pushing in this way. There's arguments to both sides. Nobody wants to be ghosted, but not that often do you want to be told straight up that someone's not interested. But this was part of the reason why I told the person who asked before, and they said they were feeling bad about feeling ghosted. And it's just like the alternative of actually finding out that someone's not that interested in you isn't really great either. So you're just kind of dealing with either an active or a tacit rejection either way, and it's kind of your decision how you want to deal with that. You know, a little bit of light ghosting, like I said, where you don't disappear all the way. You're not just gone. You're just also not that reliable. I kind of go with like a rule of 3. That's like every third text message you're like conversing. Or if it's someone who asks you to do things a lot, it's a no, and then okay, maybe yes to the third thing. This is not science, but it is sort of a way of like keeping someone in your life without letting them feel like maybe you're making them the object of your affection. I guess it really depends what they ask you to do, if they ask you to do anything. If they're just sort of like popping up on your phone, that might be kind of irritating. I mean, especially because you'd think if they're romantically interested in you, they would ask you to like do something. I don't know, given the world as it is, I don't really know what the rules are there, but you know, you'd think that like a socially distanced coffee or like a Zoom situation would be like kind of on their radar. But if it's something where you're not really that interested and you kind of want to let them know that you're not interested without having that conversation, then yeah, that I would points you towards my little rule of 3, or just like, you know, you don't have to respond to them right away, especially if it's just they're asking how your day is. That's very nice. That's very kind. And maybe that would be something you would want in a significant other, but they're probably going to treat their significant other that way. And that's nice for them. Which isn't to say like, go ahead and treat people like crap. Don't do that. Treat people the way you would want to be treated, respectfully, and you know, trust that like they can handle your rejection. It's not like you need to treat people like they're fragile or with kid gloves or whatever. Some people do value honesty, but I think that you kind of want to do what you would want done to you in this situation. If you were kind of pursuing someone and they weren't interested, how would you want them to deal with it? Would you want them to call you out on it? Or would you want them to just kind of subtly let you know? So this is from someone who read Alone with You in the Ether, sent me a super nice message about it and about how it was obviously very personal, which I really appreciated because it was very personal. You can definitely point to certain lines that are just absolutely just me. But yeah, so I wanted to ask you something about on your next video. How do you keep educating yourself? You seem so very smart and confident about everything you say, and your work is always so well researched. How do you manage that? And now there's a plane. I'm always very impressed by your knowledge. I guess some people, men, might even be intimidated by that. Yeah. There are definitely plenty of men who think that I am like too much, or a bitch, or bossy, or, you know, any number of things. I do think this is two parts, because you can be a very educated person and maybe not know how to speak confidently, or you can also speak confidently and not know what you're talking about. So I do think this is two different things. And I also do think that throughout most of my life, it was kind of reinforced that people were interested in what I had to say. So in some ways I got very lucky. When I was in high school, I had a lot of leadership roles. I also did We the People competitive civics, which is like now hard to explain. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it was basically like we were split up into 6 units. I was in Unit 1, which is the philosophical underpinnings of the Constitution, and we would essentially give like a prepared 10-minute or so speech split up into 5 people, and then we would do a question and answer period after that. And it was reinforced for me many times that even though there were 3 boys and 1 other girl in my unit, and so even though it was a very male-dominated team, one of the more male-dominated teams, I do have the benefit of having had a lot of people, and especially men, reinforce for me that what I'm saying has value. So I am lucky that way, that people do listen to me, and that has kind of made it so that when I talk, I expect people to listen to me. So part of it is just believing that what you say is valuable, that what you contribute to a conversation is important. And I know that's a really big step, and that if you're the kind of person who's like, parents shut you down a lot, or older siblings did that to you. I probably did that to my younger siblings. I regret that sometimes. Or, you know, if you're one of the less, like, maybe you're one of the less dominant friends in a friend group or something where you feel like maybe what you're saying gets shut down a lot, that can all feed into the way that you express information and your beliefs. One thing I always think is that you should speak with conviction as much as possible. Which is not to say that you assume you know everything about everything. Conversation and a give and take is so important. I never try to assume that I know everything. I constantly worry that I haven't gotten things quite right, but I'm just trying to speak from a place of, from what I understand, this is how the world looks to me. If that comes across as very informed or very educated, I think that part of it is that sort of mirage of knowing that usually when I speak, people are interested. As far as actually educating yourself, I think that's, like I said, conversation is so important. I always talk about how I do like thought exercises, which you may be familiar with. These are the things that kind of drag you down that Wikipedia spiral, that thing where you have a thought and then all of a sudden you're looking it up. I really actually really value those times because that's like curiosity sparking, and you can follow that road. I mean, obviously it shouldn't disrupt whatever you're trying to actually get done, but I think there is a lot of value in, I'm curious about this thing, it's interesting to me, and I'm going to read more about it, or I'm going to seek out more information, or I'm going to talk about this with other people. A lot of times, the first thing that happens to me when I am very interested in something, or I have this like theory about something random, the first thing I want to do is talk about it with a friend and kind of bounce off like, what do you think about this random thing that just occurred in my head? Sometimes I just want to think about what something means or how it affects the way people behave. Sometimes in therapy as well, I'll just sit down with my therapist and be like, you know, I just randomly remembered this one thing in connection with this thing that was happening. Let's talk about how those things might be connected. For me, it's a lot of like, how are all of these things connected? So it's not so much just knowing facts, but knowing how that applies in some larger sense, which I know is hard to talk about in the abstract, but Alone with You in the Ether was just a large number of thought experiments. Many of the things that Aldo and Regan say to each other, or that they just think about, are very much the way I process things when I am first initially realizing that I have some sort of curiosity. So I'm not a genius by any means. I'm constantly learning. I try to take the position that I don't know everything. I barely know anything, which is why I think it's important to also have friends who are curious and who are interested in a lot of different things. I love very eccentric people who are very, very into their thing that they're very into, especially if it's something that I know nothing about. I love to talk to people who have interesting jobs, who have, you know, sort of offbeat interests, things that I would never hear about if I had never spoken to them. I like to think that you gain something basically every time you meet someone, because every person you meet is this like treasure trove of information you've never considered, or even things you've considered but have never processed the way that they've processed it, which is why the best part about doing sort of like a joint thought exercise is, here's what I'm thinking, what do you think? And having that sort of bounce back at you from a different perspective is one of the most valuable things. Not to downplay my response to that asker a few weeks ago that was like, so I know this Trump voter, and like, what do you think about his opinions? That was not a conversation you would want to have. You want to ideally like not have to convince people of fundamental things that you believe, but to learn about how they look at the world. I mean, that's what's interesting about fiction to me, is seeing the way that an author views the world. Like, yes, it's a story, but you can hear a story, the same story, many times, and hearing it from someone else's voice is still worth doing every time, because even if you know the story, even if you know the characters, you are learning something new by experiencing it in a new way. But, you know, read is a very obvious one. Read across genre, read subjects you don't normally read. I think anytime you feel that little like spark of something in you that's like, oh, that's kind of interesting, make it a habit to like follow that rabbit hole and see what else is and why it's interesting to you. I have the benefit of having a very good like English and literature sort of base education, which means sort of questioning why I like things, what makes things good or bad, so that not necessarily there is a correct answer, but knowing why I like something or why I don't like something, and working through the thought process of what does this mean to me subjectively, what about it is objectively good or bad, what does it reflect about the world, what does it say about, you know, what does it say about my principles and convictions, what does it say about social conventions. The way that I read is very much the way that I think about things, / the way that I think influences the way that I read. So yeah, I think you want to sort of just always come at things from a place of curiosity, from a place of, this thing is exciting to me. What has excited me about it, and how can I become more excited? What would excite me even more, to learn even more? My English teacher used to have this quote on the wall that was, education is not the filling of the pail, but the lighting of a fire, basically. And yeah, so I kind of always come at everything from this. I'm not trying to fill a bucket. That bucket will never be full, but that fire will always keep burning. Which I don't know if that was very helpful. But certainly you can speak as if you know things. One of my best sort of rhetorical strategies is the pause. If you can train yourself to pause instead of say, that usually makes people think that you know what you're talking about, because the pause it sounds less like you're tripping over something and more like you might just be thinking about it. So that's one piece of advice. And lastly, someone asked me this question and I felt that I wanted to answer it in writing. I am a better writer than I am a speaker, believe it or not. So I'm just going to read you my response, just because, I don't know, I might have something to add to it, but it does feel very, very strongly relevant. So, I constantly read your works because you make me feel safe and at home, which is silly because I don't know you, but really I'm just so scared. I'm in high school and a girl, and I feel like my childhood has been ripped out of my hands and that I don't have a future, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg just was the final straw. I don't know, I feel so hopeless and angry about being hopeless. So the first part of my response was, it's not silly to take comfort in fiction. What you feel while reading or watching something is a real emotion you're actually experiencing, so let me open by assuring you that there's nothing wrong with coping with the world by processing in other ways. Safe ways, like fiction, have lower stakes and allow you to deal with your emotions in a manageable way. You do know me, because you know the way I see the world. And if seeing the world that I see is something that brings you comfort, then that is something that I am unbelievably happy to do, which is true. I do feel that people who read my works do know probably more about me than people who meet me in person, because you are seeing the heights and the depths of my experience. So I think that there's nothing wrong with believing that you know me because you've read all of my works. I've written a lot of them. Almost everything I've ever thought has been written down in a story. So as for the rest, I was just recently thinking how powerfully helpless it would feel to not be of voting age in this election, particularly with all the messages seeming to revolve around some obscure call for action by young people. Youth activists like Malala, Greta Thunberg, Emma Gonzalez are all incredibly admirable, but they're also proof that the burden of producing tangible results can't simply fall to the young. As frustrating as it is, policy change comes from lawmakers and institutions. Direct action can help a community, but as a nation, we are shaped by much more than any individual can do, which is not to necessarily make you feel better. I doubt it does. But to be clear that the stress you might feel is not only unfair, but a form of suppression. It's disillusionment that will keep you from actively participating when the time comes. You're not wrong to say you're being robbed of a childhood, and your fear of not having a future is a valid one. There's not much I can say in that respect because I'm scared too. For me, the fear doesn't come from Trump or his political disciples, but the unfathomable schism that's happening between the ideologies of the two political parties. How do we resolve this? It's one thing to elect a new president, to flip the Senate, to take the institutional steps necessary to heal all this scorched earth, which are all things we need to do without question. But how do we confront the ideologies that seem so incomprehensible? The loss of RBG is so painful precisely because we have already witnessed how little some of this country seems to care for the rights and dignities of women and minorities. It is hard and harder every day to wonder how it could be possible that what's right will prevail when institutionally, systemically, we are at a disadvantage. We have no way of knowing whether meaningful change will ever occur or whether things will worsen. But we have to find the energy to believe in first and then work towards the progress that we are not guaranteed. The entirety of our political problems stem from a subset of society that feels something has been taken from them. Because it has. Redistribution of social power is a good thing because it was in one group's hands for far too long. And it is very literally being taken from them. Not that they should have ever had so much of it in the first place. Straight white Christians are angry because not straight, not white, not Christians have gotten this crazy idea that they deserve a fucking voice, which is why every argument feels so spectacularly dehumanizing. It's not just against your political beliefs, but against your right to even exist, which is why it hurts so much. I know it's hard to see any of this as a good thing. I know everything is hard to see as good right now, but it is, more so than ever before, a long justified revolution. You are living through a revolution, and that is why you feel stressed, it's why you feel scared, it's why you feel robbed. And I wish there was more to say on the subject to ease that for you, but believe me, each day that you choose to be optimistic, to believe that people and communities and societies and countries can change for the better, is a day you're making an incredibly brave and world-altering choice. Don't doom scroll. Social media is alarming, Twitter especially, because it's impossible to tell what's real, what's trolls, and what's just people screaming into their computers for lack of anything real to do or say. Your algorithm is feeding that little monster in your head that tells you the world has never been like this before. But it has. Wars and genocides and economic depressions and natural disasters and worse. But change is possible. I can't promise you when it will happen, because history proves that progress is not a straight line. But you have to have faith in the anomalies, the bizarre chance that everything that seems to be going wrong might somehow, with enough effort, go inexplicably right. There are so few certainties in life. That you will find love, or find your passions, or find where you need to be are all equally mysteries that your life has yet to reveal to you. Have faith in action. Have faith in conviction. Have faith in your value. That is revolutionary, and so are you. Anyway, the answer you are looking for is yes, is now available. Hopefully we'll have more to say. I don't have my copy yet, but when I do, I will show it to you. So yeah, on the Daily Witch podcast, my editor Tanya did a reading from Stone's Throw, so I'll leave that link for you as well. Anyway, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.